When Representative Ted Lieu confronted FBI Director Kash Patel with an explosive audio recording detailing Jeffrey Epstein's secret safe, it completely dismantled the official narrative regarding Donald Trump and exposed a glaring failure within the nation's top law enforcement agency.
You a video clip of what Michael Wolff said Epstein told him was in the safe and what he showed the author was in this safe. Okay, so that's great. So wouldn't it be great if FBI subpoenaed the estate of Jeffrey Epstein for all that information?
The estate is under no obligation to provide that material, even pursuant to a subpoena. That's a great point.
Yeah, that's just false.
Okay.
That's just false. You're the frickin' FBI. You can subpoena the information from the estate, and you better do that.
Kash Patel walked into that hearing convinced he had every answer locked down. Hours of preparation, talking points memorized. The director of the FBI, ready for battle. Then Ted Lieu did something devastatingly simple. He didn't hand over a document. He didn't drag him into a legal debate. He just hit play. And what exploded from that recording wasn't just another oversight moment. It was a brutal, direct challenge to whether Kash Patel actually controls his own agency's most explosive investigation.
You say that the FBI has Epstein's list. They're sitting on it. That doesn't seem like something you should do. You're protecting the world's foremost predator. That seems like an evil thing to do, regardless of who may be embarrassed in the release of that list. Why is the FBI protecting the greatest pederast, the largest scale pederast in human history?
Simple, because of who's on that list.
I was sitting talking to Epstein, and he said, "Wait a minute, I got to show you something." And then he went into his safe, and he came out with photographs. They were Polaroids, I think, and he kind of spread them out like playing cards, and it was Trump. I mean, I think there were a dozen of them, and it was Trump with girls of an uncertain age at Epstein's Palm Beach house, where all of the things that he would ultimately be accused of took place. And I remember very vividly 3 of them. There are 2 in which Trump is, the girls, topless girls, are sitting on Trump's lap. And then a 3rd in which he has a stain on the front of his pants. And the girls are kind of pointing at it, sort of bent over, laughing.
I ask you, have you asked to talk to Michael Wolff?
You raise a great point. I haven't personally asked to talk to Michael Wolff.
Has the FBI asked?
But the FBI, I'll get back to you if the FBI specifically
so Michael Wolff
has
has
ever.
About 100 hours of testimony of Jeffrey Epstein. Wouldn't it be good for the FBI to interview Michael Wolff?
I'm not saying they haven't. I just don't know.
Has FBI subpoenaed the tapes that Michael Wolff has conducted of Jeffrey Epstein?
Kash Patel walked into that congressional hearing room appearing fully prepared. He seemed convinced that he had every answer locked down, with his talking points memorized and hours of preparation behind him. The director of the FBI looked ready for a political battle. Then Ted Lieu executed a maneuver that was devastatingly simple. He did not hand over a thick, redacted document. He did not attempt to drag the director into an abstract legal debate. He simply hit play on an audio recording. What erupted from that tape was not just another routine moment of congressional oversight. It was a brutal, direct challenge to whether Kash Patel actually controls his own agency's most critical and highly publicized investigation. The audio featured a discussion regarding the FBI's handling of Epstein's records. A voice questioned why the Bureau was sitting on vital information, effectively protecting one of the world's most notorious criminal figures. The recording asked a fundamental question. Why is the FBI shielding the most prolific offender in modern history? The answer suggested was chillingly straightforward. Because of the powerful names contained on that list. Patel likely thought he was ready for standard political theater. However, Lieu's move exposed something far more alarming to the American public. It revealed an FBI director who appeared either entirely reluctant or surprisingly unable to fully wield the immense investigative power of the bureau he commands. When pressed specifically on the issue of subpoenaing the Epstein estate for hidden, unreleased material, Patel did not aggressively defend the bureau's authority. Instead, he minimized it. He suggested to the committee that the FBI's hands were legally tied, claiming the estate was under no obligation to provide that material, even if a subpoena was issued. Lieu cut him down instantly. His voice was sharp, logical, and completely unflinching. He stated clearly that Patel's claim was simply false. He reminded Patel that he is the director of the FBI, possessing the clear authority to subpoena that information, and heavily implied that he had a profound duty to do so. That single explosive exchange was not a mere footnote in the hearing. It was the opening salvo in a grueling 5-minute sequence that laid bare deep and deeply disturbing gaps in how thoroughly the federal government has actually pursued the Epstein network. As the director, Patel bears the ultimate responsibility for this investigation, yet his initial answers already broadcasted hesitation and deliberate deflection. And that initial exchange was merely the warm-up for what was to follow. What Representative Lieu revealed next, detailing exactly what was kept inside a safe that Epstein himself had opened, alters the entire landscape of this scandal. Lieu pivoted to the accounts of Michael Wolff, the prominent journalist and author. Wolff described an encounter where he was sitting and talking directly with Epstein. According to this account, Epstein suddenly decided he needed to show the journalist something important. Epstein walked over to his private safe, opened it, and returned with a collection of photographs. Wolff described them as Polaroid pictures. Epstein then proceeded to spread these photographs across the table, laying them out much like a hand of playing cards. The subject of those photographs was Donald Trump. Wolff estimated there were about a dozen pictures in total. They featured Trump alongside young female companions of an uncertain age, taken at Epstein's infamous Palm Beach residence. This was the very location where a vast majority of the illicit activities Epstein was ultimately accused of took place. Wolff vividly recalled 3 specific photographs from that collection. In 2 of them, the young companions were described as sitting directly on Trump's lap. In a third photograph, Trump was depicted with a visible stain on the front of his trousers, while the young companions were pointing at it, bent over in laughter. It is vital to sit with the gravity of that specific testimony because it recontextualizes everything that the FBI claims to have done. This highly specific, deeply compromising description did not originate from a newly declassified FBI file. It was not extracted from sealed court testimony gathered by federal agents. It was delivered by a journalist. Michael Wolff, by his own documented account, spent approximately 100 hours conducting recorded conversations with Jeffrey Epstein over a span of several years. This represents an unprecedented, massive historical archive of primary source material. Wolff has publicly stood behind his reporting, including his release of information where Epstein explicitly described Donald Trump as his closest personal friend for an entire decade. This presents a pattern that is logically impossible for the public to dismiss. Time after time, the most explosive, detailed, and damaging revelations in this entire case emerge entirely from outside the FBI. The critical breakthroughs come from investigative journalism, private estates, and personal recordings. They never originate from the bureau that is supposed to be leading the charge. Therefore, when the director of the FBI sits under oath before Congress and issues a flat, unequivocal denial that any such photographic material exists or was ever aggressively pursued, a serious logical conflict arises. The primary question is no longer whether Wolff's recounting is flawless evidence. The real question is how the nation's highest-ranking law enforcement official can claim absolute certainty when his own intelligence apparatus consistently learns the truth last rather than first. That dangerous, widening gap in investigative competence is exactly where Ted Lieu directed his next strike. The answers that followed were even more revealing about the Bureau's operational paralysis. Lieu asked Director Patel a broad, foundational question. He established that Trump and Epstein were known associates and asked Patel to confirm the existence of photographs showing the 2 men together. Patel offered a heavily qualified response, stating he did not possess the entirety of the photographs, but acknowledged they had been photographed together in public settings. Lieu then tightened the snare. He asked directly if there were any photographs showing Trump with companions of an uncertain age. Patel answered with a definitive no. When challenged on how he could possibly know that with such certainty, Patel deployed his primary defensive shield. He argued that if such incendiary information existed, it absolutely would have been brought to light by the multiple presidential administrations and legions of FBI investigators who have scrutinized this case over the past 20 years. Patel's entire institutional defense rested entirely on that one highly arrogant presumption. His logic dictated that if something significant existed, the historical weight of a 2-decade investigation would have automatically surfaced it. That was his entire shield. With a single sentence, Representative Lieu shattered that logic completely. He brought up the now infamous birthday letter. For vital context, House Oversight Democrats recently released a highly disturbing greeting card from Epstein's 50th birthday book. The card bore Trump's name and contained a drawn silhouette alongside a highly suggestive, imagined exchange between the two men. This document was first reported to the public by the Wall Street Journal. It was later formally handed over to the United States Congress. Crucially, it was not discovered or provided by the FBI. It was provided by the Epstein estate itself. While Trump's team has publicly denied writing the message and threatened legal action, the timeline of the discovery is completely undisputed. That highly relevant document stayed buried for years. When it finally saw the light of day, it arrived via external reporting and a private estate disclosure. It did not come from any proactive, investigative groundwork conducted by the bureau that Patel now commands. Lieu did not even need to prove the absolute authenticity of the letter to win the strategic argument. He only needed to use the letter to prove that Patel's fundamental logic was entirely flawed. The idea that the FBI would have found it by now simply did not hold up to basic scrutiny. Patel had inadvertently handed Lieu the proof of his own agency's failure during that very same news cycle. This is exactly why Patel's subsequent retreat was so significant. Faced with the reality of the birthday letter, the director of the FBI replied simply, "You raise a great point." This was not a robust rebuttal. It was not a vigorous defense of the Bureau's historical record. It was a complete concession, delivered live, under oath, by the specific man whose sole job is to know exactly what his agency has and has not uncovered. His central defensive argument had just collapsed in real time on national television. Instead of attempting to defend the indefensible, he simply agreed with his interrogator. This is the underlying pattern of the entire hearing. It is not absolute silence, but rather calculated evasion dressed up as polite agreement. Patel conceded just enough ground to survive the immediate question without ever actually answering it. But Representative Lieu was not finished. He had one more critical thread to pull. He moved to the one piece of tangible, physical evidence that could potentially resolve this massive blind spot once and for all. He asked the director if he had requested an interview with Michael Wolff. Patel, still reeling, repeated his previous concession, stating again that Lieu raised a great point, before admitting he had not personally asked to speak with the journalist. He attempted to deflect to what the broader FBI might have done, promising to get back to the committee. Lieu pressed harder, focusing on the sheer volume of the evidence. He specifically highlighted the 100 hours of recorded testimony featuring Jeffrey Epstein. He asked a question that should have an obvious answer for any investigator. Wouldn't it be basic investigative protocol for the FBI to interview Michael Wolff? Patel retreated further into uncertainty, stating he wasn't saying they haven't, he simply did not know. Lieu then delivered the final blow on this topic. He asked point blank if the FBI had ever issued a subpoena for the tapes Wolff possesses. Patel's answer, under the lights of a congressional hearing, was 3 words. I don't know. 100 hours. It is imperative to let the magnitude of that number sink in. 100 hours of recorded, intimate conversations between a journalist and Jeffrey Epstein. It represents the largest known, verified private archive into Epstein's dark world that exists entirely outside of official government custody. Significant portions of these conversations have already been made public, triggering explosive global headlines. Yet, under the solemn weight of a congressional oath, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation openly admitted that he had absolutely no idea whether his own massive agency had ever made a single legal effort to secure those tapes. He did not even know if they had contacted the American journalist holding them. This was not a situation where Patel was carefully protecting an active, sensitive investigation for legitimate national security reasons. That would be standard operational procedure. Instead, this was the director openly confessing a total void of knowledge regarding the most obvious, high-value target in his agency's most scrutinized case. He did not say they reviewed the tapes and found them lacking in evidentiary value. He did not say the legal process was currently ongoing. He simply stated he did not know issuing a standard grand jury subpoena for recordings that are already publicly known to exist, held by a prominent, publicly identified American journalist, is among the lowest friction investigative maneuvers federal agents can execute. It requires no secret warrants. It involves no complex foreign governments. It only requires a basic executive decision that the material is actually worth pursuing 3 years after Epstein's demise. Under the leadership of a director who built his brand on demanding total public transparency on this exact case, the official answer given to the United States Congress was that nobody had bothered to check. This leaves the public with two highly disturbing possibilities. Either the Bureau fundamentally failed to chase down the single most obvious source of evidence in the entire investigation, or its current director is so dangerously disconnected from the specific details of the file that he is completely unaware of his own agency's actions. Both scenarios are deeply damning. This profound credibility problem was exactly what Lieu utilized to pivot into his final, most aggressive line of questioning. He moved to the most infamous document of all, the Epstein client list. Lieu established the baseline facts first. He reminded Patel that the director himself had previously confirmed the list exists. He also noted that Attorney General Pam Bondi had separately confirmed its existence earlier that same year. Having locked down the premise, Lieu asked a simple, direct question. Is Prince Andrew on Epstein's client list? Patel immediately attempted to redirect. He stated that material related to Prince Andrew had been made public, but refused to answer the direct question. Lieu refused to let him escape, pressing again. Patel then retreated to bureaucratic process, stating the FBI had released an index of names. Lieu immediately fired his next targeted question. Is Donald Trump on Epstein's client list? Patel's response was identical. He stated the index has been released and that the index will speak for itself. Lieu accurately noted that this response is a massive red flag for the American public. The FBI director deliberately chose not to answer whether Donald Trump was on the list. The strategic brilliance of Lieu's questioning was evident. He did not ask about the list in abstract theoretical terms. He asked about two highly specific, globally recognized names back to back. He did this immediately after forcing Patel to acknowledge that the list is real. That is a classic investigative trap. A law enforcement official cannot publicly confirm a document exists and then flatly refuse to state whether a specific named target is on it, without that very refusal becoming the de facto answer. Patel's response to both high-profile names was structurally identical and highly revealing. He chose to redirect the committee to an external index. He refused to confirm. He refused to deny. He pointed to a piece of paper and demanded that it speak for itself. But a document cannot speak in a live congressional hearing room. That is precisely why Lieu was interrogating a human being, the director of the agency, and not simply reading a PDF. If the honest, factual answer regarding Donald Trump had been no, stating that simple fact would have cost the FBI absolutely nothing, and it would have killed the conspiracy theories instantly, Patel deliberately chose not to say it. He chose to avoid the word twice in a row. This tense exchange was not an isolated incident during that afternoon. Earlier in that very same hearing, Representative Daniel Goldman, who brings the heavy experience of a former federal prosecutor to the committee, looked at Patel directly. Goldman did not mince words, outright accusing Patel of actively hiding the Epstein files and declaring him an active participant in an ongoing cover-up. The institutional resistance went even further. Later that day, the Republican-controlled committee held a highly controversial vote. By a narrow margin of 20-19, they successfully blocked a formal Democratic motion introduced by Representative Jaime Raskin. This motion sought to issue subpoenas to four major global financial institutions, J.P. Morgan, Bank of New York, Bank of America, and Deutsche Bank. The target of these subpoenas was the records detailing over $1.5 billion in massive complex transactions. Crucially, these were transactions that the banks themselves had previously flagged as highly suspicious and directly connected to Epstein's financial network. To highlight the glaring hypocrisy of the situation, Raskin played archival video footage of Kash Patel from before he assumed the directorship. In that old footage, Patel was seen passionately and publicly demanding that the entirety of the Epstein files be released to the public without delay. Representative Pramila Jayapal accurately summarized the mood of the room, loudly labeling the entire proceeding as a giant orchestrated cover-up. None of these events happened in a vacuum. They all unfolded in the exact same room, on the exact same afternoon, constantly circling back to the same three fundamental questions that Ted Lieu had relentlessly pursued. What actual evidence does the FBI possess? What leads has the Bureau actually pursued with competence? And why does the director of the FBI violently refuse to just give a straight answer to the American people? When you synthesize the data from that hearing, the picture is grim. We have a journalist's on-the-record account of highly compromising photographs, which the FBI director initially claimed couldn't possibly exist. This was immediately followed by the director's humiliating admission that his own underlying logic for that denial had already been thoroughly disproven by the press just weeks earlier. We have 100 hours of interview tapes with the primary suspect, which the FBI cannot even confirm they ever attempted to legally obtain. And finally, we have a verified client list, which the director helped confirm is real, followed by his complete unyielding refusal to state who is actually named on it. 3 separate, highly specific lines of investigative questioning. 3 answers from the director that were technically constructed responses, but entirely devoid of actual information. That is the critical reality that requires serious logical analysis. This event was never just 5 minutes of standard partisan congressional theater. It was a rigorous public stress test. It tested whether the FBI, operating under the command of Kash Patel, is actually capable of delivering the one single outcome the public has demanded for years regarding this specific case: genuine accountability rather than heavily managed bureaucratic public relations. By the time the chairman's gavel finally came down to close the session, the stark pattern was already cemented into the historical record. A congressman armed with actual verifiable investigative experience meticulously worked through the basic foundational elements of a criminal case, securing one confirmed fact at a time. In response, over and over again, the director of the FBI deliberately chose deflection over clarity. He chose calculated uncertainty over commanding leadership. He chose careful, lawyerly wording over delivering a straight, honest answer to the public. The element that makes this performance land with such a heavy impact is the historical context of the man in the chair. This is the exact same individual who, before ascending to the pinnacle of federal law enforcement, spent years building a public profile by loudly demanding that the Epstein files be fully released. The archival footage played by Representative Raskin that afternoon proved it. The individual who was once strategically positioned as the ultimate outsider, the man who promised to finally hold the corrupt system accountable, is now sitting securely inside that very system. And from that seat of immense power, he is delivering the oldest, most frustrating answers the establishment has ever invented. I don't know. I will accept your representation. The index will speak for itself. That massive, undeniable contradiction is the true story of this hearing, far more than any single, isolated viral exchange. It perfectly fits a broader operational pattern that keeps repeating across the entirety of the Epstein investigation. The vital birthday letter did not come from an FBI raid. It came from the Wall Street Journal and the estate's lawyers. Michael Wolff's chilling account of the secret safe is not the result of an FBI interrogation. It is a private journalist's own archive, built independently years before any of this congressional testimony took place. Even the existence of the infamous client list is only a matter of public record because Congress and the Attorney General forced the confirmation, not because the Bureau ever volunteered the information in the pursuit of justice. Every single time a piece of genuine, actionable truth surfaces in this sprawling scandal, it surfaces from outside the heavily guarded walls of the FBI. It never originates from within them. That is not a simple one-off bureaucratic mistake. That is a deeply entrenched operational pattern. That is the precise flaw that Ted Lieu's methodical questions were engineered to expose. And it is exactly why the phrase, "I don't know," coming from the mouth of the director himself, carries a much darker, heavier weight than it would from almost anyone else sitting in that room. Understanding this reality does not require wild speculation or baseless conspiracy theories to recognize the immense damage done. Nobody needs to invent a fictional smoking gun to prove the failure here. The actual permanent congressional record does all the heavy lifting on its own. We witness a director who cannot confidently confirm if his massive agency checked the single most obvious investigative lead in existence. We saw a director who was forced to concede his central defensive argument mid-sentence rather than attempt to defend the indefensible. We watched a director who absolutely refused to provide a plain, simple yes or no answer regarding two of the most famous names in the world, immediately after confirming that the list they are supposedly on is a real document. These are not opinions. These are the established facts delivered under oath and entered into the permanent historical record of the United States. These facts do not magically disappear when the rapid news cycle inevitably moves on to the next crisis. They get archived, replayed, heavily cited, and they will absolutely be weaponized the next time Director Patel is forced back into that witness chair. Ultimately, this entire situation boils down to a fundamental question of institutional trust. This is not about a single viral video clip meant to generate temporary outrage. It is about a thoroughly documented systemic pattern of behavior that the American public now has the complete right to judge for itself. We are dealing with a premier investigative agency whose most important paradigm-shifting disclosures consistently come from literally everywhere except its own agents. We are observing a director whose default posture under direct pressure is a highly polished version of I cannot say, heavily disguised as standard legal procedure. Whether this disastrous performance is the result of staggering institutional incompetence, extreme legal caution, or something far darker that the public is entirely justified in being suspicious of, that is the lingering, heavy question this hearing leaves squarely on the table. And it is a question that is absolutely not going away anytime soon. If you want to continue following the hard facts of where the Epstein Files investigation actually stands today, grounded strictly in what was testified to under oath and not the sensationalized versions built purely for social media outrage, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Let us know down in the comments what you believe this undeniable pattern of deflection actually means for the future of the investigation. We will continue tracking every logical development in this case as it unfolds, bringing you the professional analysis you need to understand the reality behind the headlines.